Welcome to the Real Estate Investing School podcast. I'm your host, Joe Jensen. Today we've got Luke Hoffman on the call. He's a native Iowan, born and raised in Dubuque, Iowa. He attended Loras College where he met his wife, Morgan. Together they have 3 children, Lexi, Isaac, and Ryan. Luke primarily invests in Iowa, doing value-add projects from single-family BRRRR deals to even 20-unit multifamilies. As an investor / entrepreneur in multiple businesses, Luke primarily is a cash flow investor to support his love of freedom and time with his family. So I'm excited to have him on and learn about all the variety of things that he's done. So Luke, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, so maybe you could tell me a little bit about, we covered a little bit of some of the things you've done. What got you started, though? What was the very first thing that even brought real estate on your radar to jump in and do the kind of things you've done?
Yeah, sure. So we're just coming up on my 6th year of real estate. I'm doing it full time for about 4 years of that so far. Going back, I guess what got us started was I was always interested in entrepreneurship in general, but I worked for a software company out of school. And so I went to school for business management and marketing. And part of that job I had was traveling. So I would travel basically Mondays and Fridays, like 3 to 4 weeks a month. And so I would spend all this time on airplanes. And so I just got really involved. So basically one of my friends, he read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He's like, hey, you should totally check this out. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I got a flight tomorrow. I'll read it. So I read the book. And then basically from there, every week I read like at least one book, if not 2.
Love that.
Pretty fast reader. So I'd read one on the way to my job site and then one coming home on Fridays. And I just did that for like, I think just shy of 3 years before we were like, all right, let's do this.
Isn't it funny how it's it takes a few years sometimes of just digesting all of this, and you hear it and it makes sense. And then once you're doing it, you're kind of like, why did it take so long? But it's almost like it always has to like align and click and like come into perspective or to clarity when there's just so many moving pieces at the beginning, it feels like.
What's up, guys? It's Brody Fawcett. Hey, I just want to jump on here really quick and say thank you for tuning in and listening to the show week after week. It means so much to us. Real quick, if you are getting value out of this, please go ahead and leave us a review and feel free to share this with anyone who else you think might receive some value. And if you feel like you could benefit from working with us directly through a one-on-one coach like Joe, or through our trainings and online program, head on over to realestateinvestingschool.com where you can schedule a free one-on-one strategy call and dive in to see if Real Estate Investing School will add some value for you.
Oh, yeah. And, I think for me, it was just like getting the courage too, to be like, let's do this. And so trying to get one of your buddies or, my wife at the time too, like getting her on board, like, hey, this is what we're going to try to do. And so just getting all those people in alignment, because you don't want to, at least for me, I didn't want to do it alone.
It's funny. That's kind of how it was for me. I dabbled on it alone for a long time, but before I started doing it like full time, like I'm all in, it was a partner deal with a buddy of mine. We found this cheap little house in upstate New York, and a friend of mine was selling it. And we're like, dude, let's just go and do it together. It's not that much money. It just softened the blow so much. And we were able to kind of do a BRRRR thing where we were able to refinance and pull out almost all the money. And I was like, dang, why did I bring him into the deal? Like for almost nothing, he's getting like, I think he's got a $200 or $300 cash flow a month, and he only brought in like 10 grand or something like that. And I'm like, that's a pretty good return. But it gave me the courage to just go for it. So I like that concept of just doing it with somebody just to kind of break the ice.
Yeah, and I remember like when we first got started, we went to one of the Rich Dad Poor Dad like local seminars. I think it was like 3 hours from where we're at, and we bought one of the courses, and the 3 of us, my 2 buddies and myself, we basically didn't have any money, and so we all 3 because in Rich Dad's whole thing was like, hey, you can negotiate anything, right? And so we negotiated because they wanted everybody to buy like a $12,000 training package, and so we're like, well, we can't afford that, so can we just like all 3 chip in on this? And so we did that, and I still remember, like, we were in my basement, which is like unfinished with like the worst setup possible. And we're all huddled around a computer trying to go through the training courses.
That's awesome.
Just trying to soak it all in.
So you guys did it though. That's cool. So, you didn't just read the books and podcasts. You actually went and bought some courses and really sounds like you guys took it pretty seriously going through those courses together.
Yeah, I mean, we really enjoyed like the learning aspect. Our market's a little bit smaller in Eastern Iowa, so some of the software tools they had didn't really work in our area per
Sure.
se. Um, but it definitely gave us like that courage of like, all right, this is a real thing. Let's try this. Then we started walking properties local, and we realized like it's probably better to get involved with people we know here to help us kind of get our first deal going than somebody far, far away that didn't really know our market exactly.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I love that. It's funny you mentioned even just how you started with the plane rides. I feel like I get my best studying and my best thoughts and inspiration while I'm traveling on planes,
All right.
especially. I don't know, it's just like the whole world's like gone, and you get a lot done that way, which is nice.
Yeah. I mean, now you can get Wi-Fi on planes, but like when I started traveling, it was still kind of like a new thing, I guess you could say, and like it was great. You just turn your phone off and you're isolated for 2 to 4 hours,
Yeah.
really, in the United
Dude, I
States.
I do
Like do
I
whatever I
fly a
want.
lot and I've got like preferred member stats or something, so they give me free Wi-Fi, but I've never got the code for it because I'm like, I don't want Wi-Fi. I don't want internet. I want to be
Right.
isolated. Like, give me this moment. This is like the rare thing I have. So I like to be able to tell people, oh,
Hmm.
sorry, you won't be able to reach me for 4 hours, you know? If I get Wi-Fi, I
Right.
got iMessage and then I'm just back in the grind. So um
You're just in
well,
your
that's great.
office.
That's cool. So you went in with a couple buddies, bought a course. You guys went through the course. It sounds like you took it really seriously, which is cool. Obviously at the school here we have a lot of people buy our course and go through it, and some take it really seriously and they get a ton out of it, and some don't and they don't get as much out. But it sounds like you guys took it seriously. Did you partner on your first deal together as well?
So yeah, we were going to. We ended up not doing a deal together. All three of us like went separate
Okay.
directions, and two of us went into real estate, and one decided not to. But yeah, so basically we started looking at deals together, and one buddy and I, we started an LLC. We're like, all right, we're going to do this, and it's still the LLC I run most of my stuff
Nice.
through today, and it has like part of his name and part of my name, but we've never actually done a deal, which so it's kind of funny. Every time I read it, I'm like, oh yeah, way back when we started, in the
That's
basement.
funny.
Um, no, so one buddy bought some real estate, and then the other buddy and myself, we kind of put a hold on real estate actually, and we went to the different route. We went and bought a business together.
Oh,
It's
cool.
We were looking at it, from that side. I was like, all right, look, if I have 20 grand, how do I turn it into something, right? So I needed a job
Yeah.
still, needed some just weekly money type of thing. And so we were like, let's just buy a business. Let's do that first. Let's get some money rolling in, and then we'll do real estate as a second thing. That was the thought anyway. So I I quit my job in about February, about 6 years ago, and I was going to take over the business. And then like through that time, there were some issues with the business closing that we didn't close when we thought we were. So I was kind of unemployed for like 3 weeks, just kind of like, oh crap, what did I just do? I just quit my
Yeah.
job. I just threw everything away. Um, but in that process, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do some real estate at the same time. So we actually closed on our business purchase and our first rentals like within a week of each other. And so I did rentals in parallel with the business purchase.
Really? That's really cool. So break down so what was the first deal? I know you've done a lot of Burr stuff, and I want to get into that. And obviously Burr's getting more and more popular. It's always been around, but it's kind of been like key. Everybody knows
Yeah.
the term now. But tell me, what was your first deal like? Was it a Burr? Or was it just a kind of turnkey, or what did you do there?
No, so our first deal was seller finance actually. So I had been working with a local banker, building a relationship for about 2 years before we bought, and I honestly didn't have much money. Like we blew most of our cash on the business and also like buying the courses, and so we went into it and I bought a duplex and a fourplex together, a package
Oh
deal.
wow,
And the local seller was I found him on Craigslist back in the day,
nice.
and
Craigslist. Shout out to Craigslist
yeah,
if
we
there's
walked
still
it.
people finding deals on there. That's great.
I know, right? It's a little bit old school now, but yeah. So he's been in the game forever, and he was nice enough. He like saw, I don't know if it was my ambition or just he saw something in me, but he's like, "All right, here's the deal. You're going to go to the bank." He held my hand. He said, "You're going to get 80% financing from them, and I'll finance the other 20%." So we got into it with no money down.
Really, that's good. And the seller, because he was an investor, he understood the game, and he
Yeah.
saw what you're doing. He was, it's a funny thing about real estate. Like, it's the most like open armed industry I've ever seen. You know what I mean? Like, I've done
Hmm.
a lot of business and sales, and it's funny because it's just like, hey, let's teach you everything. Let's help you. Let me hold your hand through it. Even the seller to the buyer. I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah, and I mean, at the time I had no clue. Like half the stuff he was like, "You need to go say this to the bank." I'm like, "Okay, I can go just repeat what you said." Don't really understand what I'm asking for, but the banker seemed like he knew what I meant, and the seller's like, "All right, everybody's on the same page. Just go with it."
That's cool.
And like to be honest, we got to closing, and like you get prorated real estate taxes and like security deposits, all that stuff coming back to you as a credit. I had no real clue like what most of that was. Like I walked out of closing like I just got paid like 5 grand to buy these. I don't really even know how that happened. Like what just went down?
That's great. That's super cool. So then you just rented those out and were cash flowing, and you'd kind of already ran the numbers and was like, oh my gosh, like I can just make money off this. Like I've been studying and learning about, and now it's real. How'd that feel like when like those first cash flow checks started hitting your bank account after you got it all stabilized and it was just like, this is happening?
Yeah, it was so they were all rented when I
Oh,
took over,
perfect.
and some of the rents were low, but it was cash flow on day one. And yeah, so it was just kind of a weird feeling like I don't have to go to work for this. It just shows up. At that time I was still chasing
Mm-hmm.
rent a little bit, and but it's just yeah, it's an eerie feeling like this money just came to me and I didn't do anything. I didn't trade any time for it, besides maybe some office hours, but like I'm not punching the clock to get this money every day. So it definitely gave me a mindset change of like, wow, this is a real thing. Like we can do this.
That's so cool.
And I mean, I took on a lot buying the business. We actually bought a failing business and the real estate at the same time. So it was like, just like two fire hydrants blowing you in the face, like trying to figure everything out.
Yeah, that's a lot to do both at one time, but it seems like you've come out the other side okay.
Yeah, we had a rough first year. We had two fires, an eviction, and just like bad tenants all around.
Wow.
So it was like everything that could go wrong. I would say like anything that could go wrong in that first year did, and it honestly it almost made us get
That's what
out
I
of
was
the
gonna
game. Like we
ask.
were about
What
10
made
months
you
in.
stay in? Like a lot of times that would scare people off. They're hoping what I was kind of explaining, like, oh, we have this cash flow, it's so perfect, feels like a dream. But then that dream turned into a nightmare. What made you weather that storm?
I can still remember the day. Like my wife and I, so we were like sold on the whole real estate thing, and we had by this time we had connected with some local investors. So we had people that, like in our local church, there's one investor that he had 150 doors, and so we knew it worked. We've talked to him
Yeah.
before, and we basically got to that point where like, all right, this doesn't work at 6 doors. Either we need to scale up or get out. Like there's no way around
Okay.
it. And so that was just basically like a come to Jesus moment. My wife and I made the call of like, we're gonna go all in. Let's do this,
So when you decide to
and
go
we
all
did.
in, one maybe kind of catch us up to speed. How many units or cash flow or however you want to describe your portfolio to us? Where are you at now? And then the other question is just like what shifted when you decided to go all in? Like what did you do to be all in versus what you were already doing?
Yeah, so right now, as of today, we have like about 56, 57 doors. We had up to 75 earlier this year. We sold some off recently, repositioned some cash. We have some other deals in the pipeline we saw coming, so we knew to offload some cash. But
Nice.
right now, about 50, high 50s, somewhere in there. We have some Airbnbs, a couple of those. We have a house in Florida, and then we do everything else in Iowa. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess I was a huge bigger pockets person for like day one. I still listen to it today,
Yeah.
but like I didn't miss anything bigger pockets, and I just kept remembering like they always like you need to reverse engineer. What do you want? Do you want cash flow? Do you want how many doors? And so our number at that time was we want 10 grand a month coming in. That was like we're the top tier of everything. We made it if we get 10 grand a month passive
Mm-hmm.
income. And so we just reverse engineered it. I was like, hey, if I get $100 a door coming in, that's 100 doors I need. We backed it into I want to be there in 5 years. And so all in all, we got down to we needed to buy 14 doors a year, and that was our number. And that gave us something to like monetize and put a number around it, saying like, if we want this cash flow, we need to buy this many doors. There's no way around it. And so we started buying 14, at least 14 a year.
So when you
And that was like,
go on.
oh, good. I was just gonna say that's basically how once I knew I had to buy 14, like I had a number, I had something I had to look
Yeah.
for, and so it was easier to find those deals in the
I
market.
love that. So you got that clarity, you got that precise focus. Okay, I need 14 doors, this much cash flow, this will hit my numbers in 5 years. Let's talk about capital though, because I love to do that same thing. It's like, okay, let's break it all down. How are we going to do that? But then the question goes is like, do you have the money to buy 14 doors a year? and if
Mhm.
not, is that kind of what led you to the BRRRR? Is like, hey, we might need to recycle some of this money. I don't have enough new money every year. Or were you making enough with your other ventures that it could just kind of self-fund everything?
No, so my up until like probably 3.5 years ago, like we were pretty much always living off between 40 and 60 grand a year. Like we tightened our belt as far as we could, and that was the number we could make work. So we didn't put hardly any money into deals until probably the last 2 years. We did a lot of seller financing and
Cool.
found people in the market to give us deals. And then once I kind of felt like I tapped that out far enough, then I found the BRRRR method. And from that point forward, it was like, this is a no brainer. Like I'll just use one chunk of cash.
Yeah, so I want to dive into that. So with the seller financing thing, your first deal was cool because you seller financed just the down payment virtually. You got a normal loan, got the 80% loan, that's what paid for it, but then you seller financed the down payment, so you were in it nothing out of pocket. Did you repeat that
Mhm.
process with some of your other seller finances?
Yeah, so I had the same seller for my first properties. I bought another one off him the same way.
Cool.
I think it was about a year
Nice.
later, give or take, and then another different seller, but same process. So I repeated that I think 3 or 4 transactions, and that really got us like, all right, now we're over 20 doors. Like we feel like we have something going
Yeah.
here. And then I think up until I want to say it was 3 years ago, we'd only invested about 50 grand of our own cash, real cash into it. We let the business, all the cash flow build. We use that as down payments, but like we didn't touch the business for a long time.
And when you say the business, you mean the
Just
one
let it
you
grow.
bought or your real estate business, the cash flow coming from that?
The real estate
Gotcha. So all
business.
the cash flow that was come in, you weren't living off that. You were reinvesting that into deals.
Correct.
That's
Yep.
cool. So when it came to the BRRRR, when you got into recycling the money, say, hey, that can kind of cost some money, or were you find private money or hard money, or how did you fund, buying these maybe in cash and then putting in rehab money, and then what it takes, sometimes 6 months or more to get that money out. How
hmm
where did that capital come from?
So we flipped a couple houses in that whole process, kind of the year two to three. We flipped a couple. We made 20 grand here,
Cool.
20 grand there. Our first burr though, yeah, we sold a flip and it was like I think I bought it for like 26 grand or 23 grand, something like that. It was actually off the MLS. It's just
Nice.
our market. You could do that, and so that was like my first house I bought cash, and that was a cool little just moment too in my career. Like I just bought a house for
Yeah.
cash. Like it didn't matter the amount. It's just you just check that
Right.
box, of like I did this. Um, and yes, we did that, and I didn't really understand the burr process at that point, but I had a contractor locally that was doing probably about half my work. I'm super handy, so I'm very capable of doing a lot of the rehab myself. So I kind of did half with the rehab with the contractor, and then half I did on my own. And we got to the refi point, and yeah, it was just like, let's see what happens. And so the banker really held my hand through that first deal to crunch the numbers with me, like, hey, this is where you should leverage to if you want a cash flow, and this is how much money you can take back out.
Really, the banker helps you
I
make
guess,
sure you were still cash flowing when you took your money out.
yeah, I mean, they have their criteria, obviously, they need to
Hmm.
lend against, but I had built, honestly, just more of a friendship with them of like, hey, can you just help me out here? Like, make sure I'm doing this right. I'm pretty good with numbers. And so I had what I thought was the right spot, but I just had them validate
Yeah.
it, and I think it went a long way with the bank as well that I wasn't just like, hey, I need, $90,000 on a loan. I don't know why, but this is the
Yeah.
number I came to. It was more of like, here, I'm an open book. Here's what I have going. Here's what I think I know, and here's what I don't know. And we just work through
Was
it
this a
together.
DSCR loan, like portfolio in-house type thing, or was this like a conventional loan?
Yeah, it was yeah,
So
in-house
they wanted to
portfolio.
see cash flow themselves. They needed to have the debt service coverage ratio, which basically that means, that it's cash flowing. So they were making sure that happened for their own books, which means they taught you how to do it,
hmm
which is what you wanted also. And that's one thing I love about doing real estate through banks is their safety criteria usually protects you. Like, oh, you got to have some equity, you got to have cash flow, you got to have
hmm
insurance, you got to have this, you got to have that. It's like all of that protects them. They paid big money to figure out those numbers, figure out
Right.
exactly how risky they can be. And it's like, just do whatever they say and you're probably going to be good. And that's the difference between now, it's 2022 right now, December. that we're recording this and people are like waiting for a recession or collapse like in 2008. And it's like the difference is like lenders aren't doing what they did in 2008. Back then they were taking signature loans on
Right.
20 different homes with no money down, no cash flow. Like they don't do that anymore. If you do what they make you do now, like you'll probably be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did that a long time with the banker. I mean, I still use that same banker today. That's where all but I think two of our houses have
That's
loans through.
awesome.
I just built that relationship, and also that they trust me now too. Like they do some different stuff, different products that they don't offer to all investors locally. But we built enough rapport, and I've proved myself. Hey, I can do these types of projects.
Yeah,
and so they're willing to
I've
do it
heard of
in-house.
people building these relationships, especially with like local banks, wherever, where they don't even have to wait the 6-month seasoning to refinance. Have you experienced that where you don't have to wait as long, or do you still kind of have to wait the full 6 months?
No, so I actually do it totally different. I call it the front
Okay,
end burr.
break that down
And so
for
we
us.
do ours, like I've done a ton of deals like this locally. So same idea as buying a burr. Say, to make numbers easy, you buy it for 50 grand. So you're going to put 20 into it, and then it's worth $1.50. And so they're going to give you 75% of 150 on a loan. So what I do is I go into my bank and just say, hey, I'm buying this house for 50 grand. Give me an as completed appraisal. And so they'll say, all right, we're going to give you, say, $100,000 in debt. And they give that to me day one at close. And so I don't bring any money to the table to close. I don't bring any money to rehab. I usually walk away from closing with all my rehab money. They don't even put it in like escrow. It's just literally in my checking account. They trust me to do the rehab the way I said. And then whatever my quote unquote profit on the refi that I take out, that's all just my cash again at close.
Really? So I want to make sure I fully understand that. So when you go in to get the initial loan, is this to purchase it, or you've already bought it cash and you're going to finance it?
Mm-hmm.
They're letting you do it to purchase. So you say, hey, I'm
going
to purchase this, beat up place. And obviously these aren't conventional loans, so they don't care if the conditions, below, Fannie Mae standard. Right. So you say, hey, I need this much to buy it, this much to rehab it, and the ARV, the after repair value, will be this much, and they'll lend you, what do you get, 70-80% of the ARV?
Yeah, usually 75%.
And they'll lend you 75% of the ARV ahead of time to actually buy it and rehab it and everything, and then you don't have to refinance or do anything.
Right. Yeah, so I have long-term debt on a day one, and a lot of times it's interest only for any, whatever I ask for, but typically I do 6 months.
Cool. So you do 6 months interest only, and then the only thing you're funding, or the only holding costs you have, is the interest payment during the rehab. Right. And then you just start making the normal payments. And what are these amortized at? These like 20 years, 15 years?
Usually 20 years. 5-year balloons on 20-year
5-year balloons. So after 5 years, you might have to. Do they let you refinance those after the 5 years, or do you actually have to like find new financing?
No, we've done a couple. A couple of my earlier deals, they were on like 3-year arms or 3-year balloons in 5 years. We just did a couple of them. Or if with rates being low, we refinance some to pull cash out. And so they want our business still, so they're keeping it in house and just roll it back into another loan.
I love that. I think that's so cool that it just goes to the power of having that relationship with your lender, which, to be able to front load your burr and not have to put any money in, like that's really, really powerful. Did they let you do that the first time, or is that after you'd got a couple under your belt?
No, we did a couple flips first, and they were pretty leery on even like throwing any cash into that deal. They were just like, I don't know, they're pretty conservative. Yeah. So they're like, that's pretty risky. You're flipping, you're inexperienced. Like, I don't know. And so I got them to do a little bit here or there. And yeah, it just took time. I mean, I had a couple successful deals. I had another one. And then finally they were like, all right, we'll go out on a limb here for you. And we did the first one. He told me right then, hey, we're going to do it on this one deal. Don't get used to it. It might never happen again. Like, we're just kind of playing around here and see what happens.
And then it worked out so well. They're just like, cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, the cool part was like I was able to put money in my pocket day one. If I say I was all in for 50 grand after the rehab and I already financed it at 75, that 25 grand, like they fully knew I was putting in my pocket immediately to do another deal or whatever I was going to do.
What black magic did you work on that lender to get them to do that? Like if I could get a lender to do that, that sounds fantastic. That's really really cool. But it's funny because it's all about risk mitigation. That's what real estate investing is. From the buyer to the lender, everybody just needs to like, how am I going to get screwed? And do I feel comfortable doing this because I trust whoever I'm working with? And it sounds like they
Hmm.
trust you enough that they know it'll work.
Yeah, I think I built a lot of trust too. I'm kind of a spreadsheet guy and a little bit of a nerd there. And like when I my first few deals, and even to today, like I showed them my spreadsheet and like I custom built my own, way to analyze deals.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, hey, this is my numbers, and I walked through everything with them. And so I feel like it just came like I have a plan, I have my numbers all straight. So now poke a hole in it if you want to. I didn't just come in and say like, hey, I want to buy this. I don't really know what I'm doing. Just give me some money.
Yeah.
I came
That's
prepared.
cool. So you actually showed them your spreadsheets, broke down the numbers, let them see how safe it was for them, what the cash flow would be. So they're just it kind of took away any of the scary, unforeseen unknowns for them. They were able to go, oh, like he did all the underwriting for us. Like it looks solid.
Right. Yeah, and I had one of an more experienced investor tell me like you basically, I mean, it's just like sales anywhere. Like, what's the objections they're going to have? Handle those
Mm-hmm.
immediately. So if you think they're going to be concerned about something in your personal life, call it out and show them why it's not a concern. And so I just did that. The other cool thing that I learned to do probably about a year in was I would run my spreadsheet and I'd be like, here's the perfect scenario pro forma. And then I would stress test it and like change the interest rate. At that time, it was like from 4% to
Yeah,
6%. And so I would run it at that with like less income, and I'd give them multiple scenarios of like, hey, I stress tested at 2% higher interest with 10% less rent, and still cash flows to your
that's
ratios.
cool.
And so giving them those, I was like, what's your, what do you not see as good in this deal anymore? Because I just made worst case scenario
And
for
you're
you.
able to see what their preferences were. Like, hey, like some lenders will want a DSCR, which is your debt service coverage ratio, basically like how much you're cash flowing. Like 1% would be break even. Anything above that, is actual cash flow. So what is their criteria? Was it like 1.2, 1.5, just one? And then you're able to know that and show them that?
Yeah, they wanted 1.2 at the time. Now I tried for at least 1.25 just to make
Mm-hmm.
stronger deals with the market in general. But yeah, I mean, I just asked them. Like, they turned me down on one loan on a long time ago, and I was like, "That's fine. I don't really care about this one deal, but like, help me figure out how I can get the next one." And they just said like, "We need all these criteria," and they listed them out for me. And so that was kind of what I implemented as my buying criteria at
I
that
love
time.
that because sometimes I feel like in this industry there's this kind of a feeling that it's like, oh, it's us against the lender. Like that darn lender won't give me enough money, or they don't see how valuable this is to me. Like it's a good deal, I promise. It almost kind of feels like there's this conflict there, but I like what you did, Luke. Is you went to them and said, hey, what exactly do you want to see? And then you built your deal to give them what they wanted, as opposed to trying to convince them that what
Hmm.
you wanted was good enough for them. You just said, well, what do you want? I'll go design that.
Yeah, we had lots of conversations too about, what do you want my personal finances to look like? We went through my credit report again, relationship, just like he would be like, well, you need to pay off this vehicle or
Mm,
move money over here because that's going to make you look like a stronger borrower. And so I would do it, and then I'd go back and be like, all right, I did that. Now
yeah.
what? And just keep
Do
repeating
they
that
want you to have certain
process.
cash reserves for every property and things like that as a DSCR loan?
They did. They weren't
Oh,
super
cool.
critical on that. It was more that I was a strong borrower based on my income or money I had saved up in reserves. But as long as I had one or
Yeah.
the other, they weren't as
That's
concerned.
that's really cool, man. That's exciting. I think the lending aspect of all this can be such a obviously a game changer, and it's funny because I always say this. It's still the Wild West. I feel like there's no rules when it comes to lending. Like the fact that you're sitting there saying, "Hey, I'm getting 100% purchase price plus 100% rehab plus more," full like cash out refinance style up front on these rehabs.
Hmm.
That's crazy. And obviously these aren't, $500,000 deals. It sounds like these are
Yeah.
lower risk deals, and so there's less money in it. So if it did go south, they're not out $1 million, which sometimes it could be that for people who are doing really really big deals in high expensive markets. Um, that
Yeah, in our market, most of my deals, like I typically don't leverage over about 90 to 100 grand, even like on a
mm,
duplex. Single family is like 85 to 95, and a duplex about 100 is my max that I'll
mm,
leverage. And that's where their cash flow works in our
Is
market.
that something your lender also said they want? Did they ever give you a max? Like, hey, we can do this, but like it has to, like, you can't borrow more than this to do a project.
There. Yeah, they gave me some criteria
Cool.
that way. It was really just based on, I knew what the cash flow ratios need to be, so that was pretty easy to back and reverse engineer into the amount of debt.
So how did you build that relationship initially with the lender? Did you know them from an outside source, or was it literally just when you first went in and started getting your first deals and you just kind of built it from that?
Yeah, so I didn't know them beforehand. I probably met them through somebody, but it was just like a really cold introduction of, hey, this kid might want to get into real estate someday. You should talk to this guy. He's a commercial lender. So we went out to lunch, had a couple meetings. It was like a 2-year process before we closed our first
Really?
deal. But it was just every once in a while we'd check in. He would see what we were up to. We just clicked. He was newer to the bank, so he's probably within a year or two of my
Oh,
age.
cool.
And so we just got along, and so he's grown through the bank, and I've grown with him as well.
That's awesome. I just think that's so cool. And I assume this is just like a small local credit union type thing. That's
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah, small local
I
bank.
love it, man. Well, that's great. Again, I could harp on the lending stuff because I think it just really does just open up all these possibilities that people never thought were possible if they understand what is possible. And the interesting thing is, you could have talked to some other lender and they could just straight up be like, "Nope," and you could have quit and been
Yep.
like, "Oh, I guess that's not an option. Bummer." But you built
Hmm.
this relationship and you didn't know any better, and so you just kept like, "Hey, can we do this? Can we do that? What about that?" And then this kid, he came up with stuff that worked as well. It sounds like he was being creative and open minded, and it was just kind of this beautiful marriage of ideals and requirements and goals, and it all aligned, and so you guys had this beautiful thing.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other cool part that I learned fairly early on was this banker was fairly conservative, and so if I knew I wanted to have like if I wanted to close, say, 3 more deals next year, I would prepare him. So like I would, because I had goals, I knew where I was going, and so I would basically prep him now for a
Mm,
year out or 6 months out. Like I remember, like our 20 unit was our first deal that we did over $1 million, like as purchase price. In our market, that's a big number. And a year and a half before that, I was like, I'm almost to the point I want to do $1 million deal. Like that's my next like checkbox on my career. And I remember having the conversation with him saying like basically planting the seed of like I want to do a million
yeah.
dollar deal. And at that point he was like, "You're not ready. You're not we can't do that yet." And I was like, "All right, what do we need to do?" And he gave me a list of like do these things in the business in my personal life. And then a year later we closed $1 million
And
deal.
that was the 20 unit. Let's
Yeah.
dive into
Yep.
that then, man. That's exciting. So you went from doing a bunch of different kind of single family homes, these cheaper, sub 100K, sub six-figure deals, and then boom, the $1 million deal. Maybe you can share with us some of the things that the lender did want to see, but also how did you find this deal? How did you feel confident in buying it? And how did that all go down?
Yeah. So this was, yeah, February will be a year ago then we bought it. So I went to Maui for a mastermind where I met Brody out there.
Nice.
And we went through basically throughout that podcast or that mastermind. I left there saying, I want to buy a 20 to 40 unit building. I want to add some people on my team. And so I had, again, a goal. And so I came back to town and I was talking to my different investor buddies and like, I'm going to buy a 20 to 40. In our market, there's not a ton of bigger multifamily. Like 7 or 8 units is kind of like our biggest that we have. There's only probably 4 complexes that are more than
Okay.
20, and or maybe 5 or 6. But um, yeah, so this one actually, I was literally working at one of our properties, and I got the automated notification off the MLS saying, "Hey, this thing just hit the market," and it was 20 units. It was like I think 1.1 million, right around there, 1.05, and I was like, "Oh, I need this," and so I looked at the numbers real quick. They were attached to the MLS, and I literally did like on the paper, just like real quick, is it going to cash flow? And I was like, this is going to work. And so I called my realtor. I'm like, hey, I want to put an offer in. And at that point, it was already under contract. Like I think they did it off market and just brought it to the market to like make it
Mm,
official with the realtors. So I missed out. And I was like, oh, whatever. Like it happens. But then because I saw it, so I had all the data. So I was like, I'm going to analyze it just for fun. Like, you don't get this in our market very
Right.
often.
Just to run the
So I did a
numbers, just to
full,
practice.
yeah, just to practice something bigger. And so I did like the full analysis that night and the next morning. And I was like, this is actually a pretty good deal. Like, I could see this happening. And so, but again, it was under contract. So in the last couple of years, like once they go under contract, they typically don't come back unless there's some big
Yeah.
issue or something, right? And so I was like, wrote it off. This will never be mine, whatever. And so then, literally like a month and a half later, I was again on a job site working on something, popped up again. It hit the market again. And so, like, this time I already knew my numbers and I hadn't talked to my
How
lender
much
about
later?
this
Did
at
you say
all.
a year and a half?
No, like a
Month and
month
a
and a
half.
half.
Okay, cool.
Just they were in
Yeah.
escrow. And so they fell out of escrow. And so it hit the market again. And I called my realtor at this like 7:45 in the morning. I called him like, write a full price offer. He's like, what? I'm like, I don't need to walk it. Write a full price offer. We'll walk it this afternoon. Just get it under contract
Yeah,
right now.
for sure.
And he's because I knew my numbers. So I mean, it was like I know it's the deal. And so we did. We wrote the contract. We walked it at like 1 p.m. I think it was that day. And like I didn't have the financing lined up. I didn't talk to the bank. Had no way to know how I was going to do the down payment. Like I just knew it was a deal. And so I'm like, I don't care. We're just going to full steam ahead. I don't even know if I told my wife. Honestly, it was just like I wrote an offer. We're going to do this.
That's awesome. How'd you get your agent to put the offer in without any sort of pre-qualification on financing, and how they accept it without? I feel like that's kind of like most sellers want to see that you are pre-qualified.
We did a lot of business with my realtor and I had done business before. And again, just relationship. Like anytime I went to look at a property, like, so typically how I work with my realtor is if I see something hit the market, I don't waste this time going to look at it until it's either A, been on the market forever, or it's like something I'm ready to write an offer and
Sure.
I know. And so we just had that relationship of like, if you tell me you want to write an offer or you want to go look at something, there's a pretty good chance that we're probably going to write an offer and at least compete for it. And so he just took me at my word. I was like, I'll get you a
And the
pre-approval.
seller, okay, so the lender gave you did the seller accept it with no pre-approval on financing, or did you get one added for the offer?
No, I didn't have a pre-approval till 3
And the
days
seller
later.
was okay with that.
I
They were
called
just like, yeah, we'll accept the offer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the seller. It was just completely a new contact for me. He told me after we walked the property, he's like, I only took your offer because, based on your speed and your willingness to like get things done and then meeting you in person, we didn't have like a fully executed contract when I walked it. It was like tentatively, verbally accepted. And he's like, I just see you and yeah, I'll take you at your word. I'll give you the 3 days. Go get your pre-approval.
That's cool. That's cool. So that's cool that you were able to meet him in person for the walkthrough. I think, like I said, that's very valuable. And apparently you have the magic touch. People like you. They trust Luke. So they want to give you what you want. So was it officially actually under contract 3 days later with the pre-approval then? Before that was kind of a handshake deal?
Yeah, so we had it like between the buyer and seller, we had it under contract that evening. But then, yeah, I got the pre-approval and put the
Okay.
earnest money down and like actually executed 100% within
Gotcha, but
3
it was
days.
actually started that first day. That's super cool. I don't mean to like pick into the details. I just think they're interesting because sometimes it's those little things that stop you, right? Like I have a buddy right now who's trying to put a deal on it, and his agent's like, "You got to have a pre-approval letter, or the seller will never accept it," and so they're dragging their feet. And so I'm like, "Dude, you're gonna miss that deal if you don't get it in now." So that's cool that you were able to just move so fast. When you're doing your due diligence on a 20 unit, what was different between that of how you ran those numbers versus when you're doing your single families? Because you said you had ran the numbers, you felt confident it was good. Was there a big difference, or did it kind of just feel like the same analysis you typically do?
It was the same process, I would say. It was a lot more detailed. So on the single family, especially now, like in our market with single families, I hate to say it, but I do it a lot on the napkin, back of the napkin, kind of wing it because I know my
Yeah, you've
numbers
done
inside and out on
enough.
the single
Yeah.
family. Yeah, you know what a deal looks like. On this one, like I did my due diligence, like very, very detailed, called all the utility companies, got all the numbers from all the different aspects that a lot of times in a single family I would just kind of gloss over and be like, yeah, it'll be somewhere around this
Yeah.
ballpark. But this one, I spent probably a solid 3 weeks going through stuff, like hardcore
Yeah,
details.
while they were in escrow. Good thing that it's cool because it gave you the time
Yeah.
to do such an in-depth analysis. Even though I love the idea of how like you didn't have it under contract, it wasn't your deal, or someone else had already signed on it, but you just still ran the numbers for practice. And it just goes to show, it's like the reward goes to the guy who's moving. You know what I mean? Even if it's just practicing, but you're doing it. And, maybe it wasn't that deal and it could have been the next deal, but you would have been, now you could do the analysis in 3 days instead of 3 weeks because you had done it, but it worked out that it was this one, but it just, the power of just action, you know what I mean? Which is cool.
Yeah. And I know other people locally that they were like, oh, after I closed on it, like the sale was finally pushed through, they were like, oh, you bought that? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, dude, I wanted to buy that. Like,
Yeah.
how'd you get under contract so fast? I'm like, well, tell them the whole backstory we just said. And they're like, oh man, I didn't even do that. I was waiting until it came back in the market.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, it was just speed because I already had all the analysis done. I was 5 hours ahead of them.
So let's dig into it a little more if you don't mind. So you were calling utility companies, calling like service contracts, seeing what their snow removal costs, what their utilities were, what was your responsibility, what was the tenants, what those bills really came in at. You were what other things did you kind of dive into to be able to run those numbers accurately?
Yeah, so the other thing we did, which I've never done on other deals, back up a step here. So we go south for the winter, and so I put this under contract like late October, or sometime in November, I think it was like late November, and I pushed the closing till February because I knew I was leaving town the end of the year for 3
Oh,
months,
wow.
and so I wanted to have enough time to at least come back temporarily for a week or two to close. And so because I knew I was going to be gone, I couldn't just like, oh crap, I forgot to look at this. Let me drive by tomorrow and go do whatever.
Sure.
And so we set up an actual walkthrough, and I had the seller had some of his people there, but I had my agent, I had my wife come, and we had specific jobs. Like I gave my realtor a spreadsheet that he wanted to check, like, hey, when we go through the units, we're going to go through every single unit. My wife was in charge of taking pictures of like 4 or 5 things. Like I want to see underneath each vanity, underneath each sink. I want to see like what kind of water lines are coming through, what the sink traps are. I want to see the types of faucets and brands of the showers and all that
Wow.
stuff. And so she had a list of like, you take these pictures, and then when you're done with it, take a video of the whole unit. And then my realtor had another list of things that I wanted him to specifically look at, like in terms of cleanliness, paint, like because I figured when I'm going through, I'm looking at what I want to see in my head, but like there's so much stuff going on that it's easy to
Yeah.
miss. And you're trying to have conversations with the seller and the tenants, and like you're missing stuff because you don't want to just like ignore them necessarily, but
Yeah.
you got to do kind of a million things at once. And so we went through and we basically just like got tons and tons of data and pictures and videos. And then that's what I offline when I wasn't in town anymore. I went through all that stuff and like, all right, this unit, it has this faucet, this type of vanities, blah, blah, blah. And so I was making my scope of work essentially of like, these are the units I need to rehab right away. These are the ones that could potentially wait. And so I could build budgets around that.
So did you end up doing kind of a value add with the 20 unit as well and rehabbing? And did you do the same kind of finance where they gave you the money for the purchase and the rehab, or how did that work financing the big purchase?
Yeah, so we're still doing the value add right now. Hoping to be done right around the first of the
Cool.
year, give or take, going through. But no, so we did more of a traditional financing on the commercial side. They gave us 80%, and I had to bring the 20. And again, I didn't when I put under contract, I had no clue how I was going to get that 20%.
Okay.
Like that was
Yeah,
a
because we're
big
talking
number
what,
in my
like
head.
$200,000?
Yeah, I needed basically 250 to close
Yeah.
with fees and everything. And so yeah, I mean, the lender was like, but again, it goes back to relationship. He was trying to help me figure out like how to make it work, and so we ended up doing. I raised a little bit of private money for the short term, and then that got me about halfway. I had a property that I was selling, and so I was trying to get that to align to do a 1031, but I wasn't really sure the timeline was going to
Yeah.
work. So it was kind of like in parallel, I was trying to raise money, and which was my first time doing it as well. Um, and I also took out a $40,000 HELOC on my house through the bank. It's like not a traditional HELOC. It was just like, you give us a second position lien on your house, we'll give you 40 grand of the equity.
Dude, it's
So I had to
it's
pay for
cool
the
to hear you
appraisal.
say that, because I actually had another guest, Kevin Massey, we interviewed a while ago, and he did a similar thing on I think it was like a 64 unit, and the bank
Mm-hmm.
took basically a second position lien on his home, as equity, for purchasing it,
Yeah.
even though there wasn't an actual HELOC, there wasn't an actual second mortgage placed on it, like where they pulled any money out. It was just like, okay, well, you're secure there, and if anything goes south, I guess we'll be covered. Is that kind of how it was?
Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so we just had to get our house appraised. We got 40 there, and then so the timing actually worked out pretty slick. Like I don't mean to gloss over. Like I was sweating honestly from December through the end of January because I was supposed to close sometime. I think it was mid
Yeah,
February. Like the closer we got to February, I was in Phoenix the month of January, and like it was the worst month of my career. Honestly, like I was on the phone 100% of the time trying to raise money with my buddies,
just
trying to figure out
stressed.
talk me off the ledge. Yeah, stressed. I mean, I'm not that type of person. I'm usually like pretty confident. If I'm going to do a deal, like I'm going to make sure I'm good to go. But I was pushing myself way out there and got out of my comfort zone. So it was huge growth and huge learning experience. But I mean, we were like a week away from close, and I was supposed to go to Maui for a couple weeks, and like before this, and I almost canceled the trip because I was like, I just don't think I can do it. Like,
Sure.
I got to get back and just get in my comfort zone. Basically, I need to go home and just like sit in my house, like to feel comfortable to close this
Yeah.
thing. And I've never had that feeling in my life, but we went to Maui and we spent a couple weeks before closing out there. And again, it was like, holy crap, what are we doing? But my friends, I was on the phone for hours with one of my buddies talking me off the ledge of like, I think I'm just going to close the contract. I'm just going to, whatever it is, my earnest money. If I got to eat it, it's fine. I'm just going to walk away. I don't think I can do
Yeah.
this. And that was the first time I thought about quitting. Like since I started real estate, like I was just like, it's too much. I bit off too
What was your
much.
big fears that, because I can understand like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to finance it, but what was the fear of what were you afraid that would happen of why you'd want to back out?
I think it was a lot of just that $1 million threshold. It had such a big place mentally, and I had this limiting belief that the million was just like I couldn't go past it at this point because everything up to that point was 100 grand here, 300 grand
So
there,
it just felt like a
and so it
lot
just
of
felt
debt, like a heavy obligation. That if some of these numbers, or
yeah,
the cash flow's not right, or the rentals don't come in, like I'm liable for not only the million
right.
dollars, but or $750,000 or 800,000 or whatever it was, but also for private money. Now you're bringing in other money. You got,
Hmm.
and how did you structure that? Did you put them on like I'll pay you back X amount for a year, or is it tied in long term? How did you structure the private money you brought in?
Yeah, they were just short term. There was three different people, and so I think one was a month, one was 2 months, and one was 3 months. Post purchase, I would pay them back in full, but there was no payments until the lump sum. So there was interest on it, but one payment.
How could you pay them back so quickly? Where were that capital coming from?
Well, I had a deal in contract that I was closing, and so I knew that I was getting like it was 80 grand there,
Gotcha.
and I had some other, unrelated to real estate, some money coming back to me, 30, 40 grand here and there.
So you knew the money
And so
would
like
be there,
it
and
was
that's
one
why
of
the timing was so
yeah,
stressful. Like if you had a few more months,
right.
you could have done it all yourself, but it wasn't quite there yet. And interesting.
Hmm. I was trying to align like 15 things to all go perfect, and if one thing went south, I was kind of screwed to be honest. I was like, ugh.
How much earnest money did you have
But
in
it,
the deal? Do you remember?
I think it was 5,000.
Okay, so not that's pretty good for $1 million purchase to only have
Yeah.
5,000 in. Like, so that's crazy though. That's cool to see. Like you said, the power of just stretching yourself, and it sounds like you're glad you did, and it seems like it's working out so far.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Like now I'm like, all right, we can do $1 million deals all day. Like this is fun. Like I got over that hurdle. Let's do a $10 million deal. And that's my next hurdle type of thing. Um, all in all, with this deal too, late in the game, my property was selling, and so I don't know if you've ever heard of a reverse 1031, but we did one of those as well,
Yeah, I have.
and that's
Do
what
you
made all
want do you
my
want to
stuff
break that
align
down
at
for the
once.
listeners though? The difference between a reverse 1031 versus a normal one.
Yeah, sure. So usually at 1031, you have a property you're going to sell, and so as part of that process, you hire a third party company to basically take the money. So if you're going to sell it and make 100 grand, they're going to take that money at closing, so you don't touch it, and then hold it off to the side.
Hmm.
And then you need to identify some new property that you're going to buy, and then put it into that. And so as long as you don't touch it, it's not taxable. This third party facilitates all that. Reverse 1031 is the same concept, but you actually can buy the end property you want. You can buy that on the front end and then sell your property later and roll the money backwards. And so it still goes to the third party, but they actually take title like at the new property you're buying. So my 20 unit, they bought it in some temporary holding LLC that I didn't have ownership in. And so they basically used my money to buy it. and just I had rights to manage it
Mm.
and control the asset, but they had ownership. And then once I was ready, I could close the 1031, and then they essentially did a quick claim deed and just moved the title from that temporary LLC over to mine.
Interesting. So you did end up you doing that to funding it. It was
Hmm.
from the sale of one of the other assets, and it was a 1031. But because the timing wasn't right, you couldn't do it the front 1031. You did a reverse.
Yeah, so it cost I think like an extra $5,000 to do it that way,
Okay,
but I mean it saved us at least that in taxes, if not more.
sure. That's super cool. Did you feel like the cash flow and the cash on cash return was higher on each unit than a single family would be, or was it lower, but you got more units, or what did the cash on cash return look like versus your single families?
It was definitely higher. Yeah, I would say definitely higher. It wasn't necessarily like light years
Mm-hmm.
higher. It was just kind of a lateral move for me. It was more of, again, checking a box. I wanted multifamily, and I wanted to have, to check a box of a goal of 20 units or 20 to 40
Yeah,
units. And so it was kind of a lateral plus maybe a half a step higher in terms of return, but I wasn't really concerned about the return on it. It was more of let's move the money here to there. And I also sold a property that wasn't in a great area, and so this is in a better area.
cool.
And so it was just getting rid of some headaches as
Yeah,
well.
and it's funny because sometimes the benefit is the education, right? Like, and because it was a lateral move as far as like, okay, I could have went and bought 20 single families, but honestly, that probably would have been as big of a headache, if not more, right?
Right.
But the education now that you experienced, that puts you in a whole different ballgame, like you said, because now you've broke that $1 million, you've broken that multi-unit, and you feel a lot more comfortable doing that. And I always encourage
Hmm.
people that whether even as they're first doing, like you're paying tuition to learn, to experience, to get
Hmm.
educated. And that's true even, for someone like yourself who's super experienced, you've got dozens of deals under your belt, you're 5-6 years in, but whenever you break a new, hey, you're getting your master's now, you're getting a degree in
Yep.
multi-unit, not single family. So you got to pay your dues again, and obviously it's nice
Hmm.
because we get paid to pay our dues typically.
Right.
Um, but uh, but even though it was a headache and it puts you out of your comfort zone, now you're experienced, and it sounds like you've got some pretty big goals coming up. Then,
Yeah, and I think we all hit different plateaus in our careers,
yeah,
both and personally. And I just hit certain plateaus, and it was like we need to level up again. We're too comfortable, basically. I personally I love change, and I'm like, if we're just doing the same thing for years over years, like it's one thing if it's working really good, maybe you continue to do some of that, but I'm a huge proponent of like you got to push yourself to some degree, so level up at some point.
I love it, man. We do need to wrap up pretty soon here. I have a couple questions, so I did want to ask you. Have you had like any real estate failures? Have you bought any deals that ended up just like blowing up in your face and you lost money with, or you did have to pull out, or have you any like kind of favorite failures that you learned from?
Yeah, I have. I wouldn't say it was my favorite because I lost money on it, but in terms of what you're asking, yeah. So we tried flipping a house. About it was our first deal that we did that wasn't in our local market,
Mm,
and it was only about an hour south of us. But I found this house. It was a relationship I knew from previous careers and stuff, and so I was like, "This is a home run. We're gonna just flip this house, make whatever 30 grand." And it was the worst, honestly, the worst deal we've done. Like we ended up all in all, we lost about 60 grand.
oh, jeez.
Probably I don't have gray hair yet, but I probably those would be my first ones that come through. Like it just we went from a $30,000 rehab budget to over 100,000 spent on the rehab.
Wow.
Like one that we learned, we had some issues in the rehab, so it was not a hoarder house. I wouldn't say it was more of like an old person that just collected, organized stuff.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sounds like a respectful way to
Um,
say hoarder
and so
house,
there's
but yeah, it was like a clean hoarder.
no, but it was
Yeah, a
clean.
clean hoarder.
It was like a clean hoarder, but it was like all knickknacks and like army.
Gotcha. Wow.
An older guy that passed away. We filled like a 40-yard dumpster just with stuff in the house, and then we started demo. Um, but yeah, we lost 60 grand. I mean, at the end of the day, it was because I took my eye off the ball. I had a lot going on outside of real estate with our business at that time, and I had a contractor from my local town that I thought was going to do right by me, and it just there was stuff in the rehab that
Mm,
changed that got bigger, not to his fault, And then I wasn't paying attention, so the budget just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we spent way more time. And so we made it through that, and we survived. I mean, but then we sold it. We tried to sell it, and it wouldn't sell in the MLS. Like everybody's worst nightmare. So we lowered the price a couple times, and then it wouldn't sell. And then finally, we got somebody that wanted us to sell our financing to
Mm.
them. And at that point, I was hemorrhaging cash, and I just needed to stop. So I was like, all right, let's do it. And they paid, I think, 2 months or 3 months of their mortgage, and then they stopped paying. And so we had to evict them. It took like 6 or 7 months to evict them. And then we finally got the house back, and there wasn't a ton of damage, but it was just like, it was like 2 year process of losing 60 grand.
Oh,
And we
geez.
eventually sold it. And like, I sold it. We listed it at a price I knew I was going to lose 60 grand at. Like, and the realtor's like, well, I think we can get 10 grand higher. And I was like, let's list 5 grand lower then. Like, I'm just done.
I
Like,
just get
let's write
rid
it
of
off.
this. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to do a price drop. Just make it go away.
Flips are a lot less forgiving than long hold cash flow, huh? It's a lot riskier. You got a lot of holding costs, a lot of predictions and stuff like that. But I mean, you do a lot of rehab stuff with your other burrs, which is kind of like a flip. You just keep it instead of selling it. What would you think was the main difference on that one that went south versus like the rehab jobs that worked out?
Probably because it was like out of town. I couldn't see it. So I would randomly go, might be a month before I would go, and I would just take the word. So some of the things that they were saying were
Yeah.
done weren't actually done. I was paying for them. And so it was all my fault. I mean, I'll take full responsibility. I mean, I just didn't have my game together on it.
And you think
we
you
were
can
also
trust a contractor, this and that, and you can't sometimes, which is sad.
right. And we were actually in the process of selling out of the business that we bought when we first started. And so I was exiting that business, and I actually fired the contractor and finished it from like the last 30 days. I drove every single day and finished the rehab myself just to get it to the finish line, because I couldn't afford to pay anybody anymore. I was just like, all right, you're fired, and I'll just
So
figure
this
this
wasn't
out.
your normal local contractor you used on your other rehabs. This was somebody you didn't really know, and it didn't work out.
Right.
I've had a similar experience trying to
Yep.
rehab from out of state, and if someone I didn't have a good relationship with this contractor, and I got burned too. And it's interesting because there's I do a lot of turnkey out of state cash flow stuff, and I've had great experiences with that. But when it comes to rehabbing, it's like I said, it's a much more detail oriented game, and if your head's not in it, you're not there to like check it. It can bite you hard.
Right. And that's when we realized too, we hired on somebody full time to do rehab stuff for us at that point. And so we brought all that stuff back in house. And so now we do all of our own construction in house. And so we have a lot more control and a lot more insight. We use different project management systems that I have really good ideas of what's happening
That's
at
awesome.
all times.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast just on
So
that
it was
part.
tuition.
Yeah, that was definitely your tuition there, right? Well, sweet man. Do you have any major kind of guiding principles or habits you feel like have served you well?
I would say two. So one, probably 4 years ago, I get up at 4 a.m. every day now, and that's my time that nobody bothers me. I get so much more work done and kind of get my day straight. And so I think it's a huge thing, at least in my life, it's changed, just being able to like wake up, get my coffee, because I'm a huge coffee guy, but then get my head straight before everybody else gets going. And so I feel like I have that just like one leg up on the competition. I'm ready to roll. And then the other piece I would say is cash flow. Like we have a hard and fast rule. Like it's got to cash flow. Like we're not buying anything for appreciation. It just, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like the only time it can't cash flow is maybe when we're going through rehab. But after that, it has
That's
to.
cool. I
We
think
get
that's a
rid of
good
it.
rule. And yeah, 4 a.m., that'll definitely give you some free time where no one else is texting and bugging you. I need to get on that game. I like that. Well, let's kind of end out, man. So our final questions here. What's a bucket list item, Luke, that you're excited to check off next that has nothing to do with real estate?
So I've always wanted to go dog sledding in Iceland.
In Iceland, okay.
Just like go out there in the wilderness, do the whole tent thing, like out in the
That
middle of
sounds
nowhere.
awesome. That would be really cool. Let me know. I'll join you. What
There you
tell
go.
us a little bit about freedom. I know we mentioned that in your bio, that's kind of a big thing, is having the time and freedom with your family. But what does freedom mean for you, and how does that play into your real estate strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think originally freedom meant a money thing, but now at where I'm at today, it's really nothing to do with money. It's all
Yeah.
time. Like to me, my time's more important than how much money is in my bank account because I have three younger kids, 10,
Okay,
7, and
cool.
4. And so I want to spend time with them. You can work, 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 but at the end of the day, like family's everything. And so everything in our whole business, like we run everything remote. We started going south for the winters we basically set up our business to give us the freedom to go south for the winters so that we could spend time with our kids and like pull ourselves out of the
That's
day to day.
cool. That's awesome, man. Um, and then if you could send a message to the world, you text out a message, everybody's cell phones start going off. What's that gonna say?
My text messages would be, you have to make your own way. You have to take the initiative. And so if you want to get something in life, I mean, you have to start and do it yourself to get going at least, and then find the right people.
I love that, man. That's great. This has been super good. Like we kind of hit the hour marker. I'd keep picking your brain. I feel like there's so much more. We'll have to have you back on and dig into some of more of your burst strategies and your rehab stuff and the systems you put into place there. Because I think that's something really powerful. Like you said, the systems you have, an in-house, rehab team. That's really a key piece
Hmm.
to that we really didn't touch on much. That I think is really powerful, important. But thanks for making the time to be here today. We're excited. If people want to follow you and keep in touch and kind of maybe reach out to you or whatever it may be, what's the best way to keep in touch with you, man?
Yeah, probably the best way would be to find me on Instagram, Luke Hoffman 42, and we can send a link, I'm sure. But Luke Hoffman 42 on Instagram. Otherwise, you can find me. You could always email me to luke@rentcube.com.
Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate it. Without further ado, this is Joe Jensen signing off for the Real Estate Investing School podcast, reminding you to go make your own way.